We all know Cinderella, but her story is pure fiction. What if I told you there were real-life Cinderellas whose lives were even more dramatic, dangerous, and unbelievable? These aren't just rags-to-riches tales. They're sagas of survival, ambition, and the sheer audacity of individuals who clawed their way from the absolute bottom to the pinnacle of power. Prepare to have your understanding of history completely rewritten. For a long time people believed that royal power flowed only through bloodlines. They assumed that the right to rule came from noble birth, ancient tradition, and family ties that stretched across centuries. Yet history shows that this belief was never fully true. Many women who changed the course of nations did not enter the world with titles or fine clothes. They began life far from the halls of power. Some were born in small villages. Some worked on stage. Some lived as servants. Each faced limits that should have kept them from the throne. Still they rose. Their stories reveal something deeper about human ambition, talent, and the shifting nature of political strength. These women stepped into worlds that told them they had no place at the top. Their societies were built on rules that claimed only the well-born could lead. But these rules were not as firm as they seemed. At moments of crisis, when old families fell or when a ruler needed support, doors opened for people who lived outside the noble frame. This did not happen often, but when it did, it changed history. Their rises were not smooth. Power resisted them at every turn. Court rivals mocked their origins. Historians of their own time tried to downplay their influence. Yet their achievements survived in records, letters, and stories passed from generation to generation. One of the most striking examples comes from the Byzantine Empire. In that world, high birth mattered, but talent mattered too. A young woman who once danced on public stages had little hope of joining the ranks of the elite. Performers were not respected. They were seen as low on the social scale. But a few of them had the rare mix of intelligence, presence, and drive that caught the attention of powerful men. Those who caught such attention could find themselves drawn into the complicated web of court life. From there, luck and will could push them further. One such woman rose from a life that seemed fixed in its place. She gained the admiration of a future ruler and later became a force in the empire. Her background made her an outsider, but it also gave her a sharp understanding of ordinary people. After reaching the top, she used her voice to argue for reforms that helped women who had no protection. She did not forget the world she came from. Across the continent and centuries earlier, China witnessed a similar rise. In the courts of the Han Dynasty, emperor after emperor surrounded himself with noble families. They acted as guards of tradition and saw themselves as the rightful keepers of the state. Yet even there, a woman with no title and no wealth found her way inside the palace walls. She arrived as a servant, one among many. Still, she carried a calm charm that set her apart. When the emperor noticed her, she grew from servant to favored companion. She learned quickly. She paid close attention to the moods of the court and understood the value of timing. Her rise was not simply from beauty. It came from careful decisions and a deep sense of how power works. Once she gained influence, she shaped policies that guided the empire. Her origins became a source of debate for generations, but no one doubted her impact. Stories like these might sound like legends, yet they appear again and again across different cultures. They show a pattern that historians can trace. When political structures weaken or when rulers want fresh allies, people from outside the nobility sometimes enter the spotlight. Women who understood human nature, persuasion, and survival turned these chances into lasting change. They stepped into courts filled with competition. They faced rivals who wanted to erase them from memory. Still, they held on through patience and skill. In Europe, during the Middle Ages, arranged marriages tied families together and shaped politics. Yet in some cases, a woman of humble origin could marry a man who later rose to the throne. When that happened, her past no longer mattered. What mattered was how she carried herself once placed beside rulers and advisors. Some of these women adapted fast. They learned languages. They studied diplomacy. They built networks with merchants, church leaders, and scholars. Their husbands leaned on them for guidance, and after their husbands died, some continued to hold power as regents. They spoke for the state at a moment when stability was fragile. One such figure came from a region filled with shifting borders and constant conflict. Her early life was modest. She was not expected to shape royal policy. Yet she proved to be a bold negotiator. When her husband took the throne, she became a steady partner in leadership. Her knowledge of local people, gained long before marriage, gave her insights that nobles lacked. After his death, she stepped forward to protect her young son's claim. She faced plots that aimed to remove her family from power. She answered with a mix of firmness and careful compromise. In time, her regency became respected across the realm. Another example lies in the courts of West Africa, where oral histories record women who entered palaces as attendants or artisans. Over time, some earned the trust of kings through their advice and loyalty. A few played key roles in trade negotiations or diplomatic missions. These women rose not because of birth, but because they recognized the needs of the moment. They shaped military strategy, coordinated alliances, and supported cultural growth. Their origin stories remind us that leadership does not always follow a straight path. These unlikely royals appeared in societies that limited a woman's place. This truth makes their rise even more impressive. They carried no noble title in their early years. They had no schooling meant for future rulers. Yet they entered the game of politics with sharp instincts formed by daily struggle. Their survival depended on reading people, understanding danger, and knowing when to speak or stay silent. These skills served them well in palace life, where every word and gesture carried meaning. Even after they gained power, they never fully escaped judgments about their origins. Chroniclers sometimes painted them as grasping or unworthy. This bias came from a belief that royalty should mirror tradition. But tradition evolves. When these women acted with purpose and strength, they showed that leadership was not the property of one class. They proved that lived experience outside noble circles could build wisdom just as strong as formal training. Their stories teach us that history is shaped not only by the privileged, but also by those who refuse to stay where society places them. Many of these women worked quietly at first, building trust with their allies and demonstrating their abilities. The more they succeeded, the more they pushed the limits of their roles. They sponsored building projects, advised on legal reforms, and supported artists and scholars. Many left legacies that lasted long after their deaths. In some cases, their rise shifted public views about what types of people could hold power. In other cases, their achievements were buried under later attempts to restore the idea of pure noble rule. Modern historians must dig through layers of bias to see their true influence. When we uncover their stories, we see a fuller picture of the past. We see that history was not as rigid as it appears on the surface. Looking at these lives also helps us reflect on how power works today. It reminds us that talent can come from anywhere. It also reminds us that social barriers can be challenged, even in times that seem completely fixed in tradition. These women did not rise because someone opened a path for them out of kindness. They rose because they recognized small openings and used them with skill, patience, and courage. They turned moments of chance into lasting authority. Though centuries separate them, these women share a common thread. Each arrived at court without the security that noble birth usually provided. Each had to prove herself. Each faced doubts from those who believed leadership belonged only to certain families. And each responded by forging her own route to respect and power. The dancer who became an empress used her influence to push for laws that protected vulnerable people. The palace servant who became a consort helped guide decisions that shaped an empire. The village girl who became a queen secured her child's throne and kept her realm steady during one of its most fragile periods. Across continents, others built diplomatic ties, strengthened trade, and preserved culture. Their stories matter because they show human possibility. They remind us that leadership is not always inherited. It can grow from unexpected soil. When we look closer at these women, we see courage, intelligence, and resolve. We see that their origins did not limit them. Instead, their early struggles sharpened them. These struggles taught them to navigate complex social worlds, to recognize hidden motives, and to find allies where none seemed to exist. As we revisit their journeys, we understand why their stories endure. They continue to inspire because they show how far a determined person can go even when the world insists that she stays in her place. They also remind us that history is richer and more varied than simple tales of noble families passing down crowns. Real history includes sudden rises, bold steps, and lives shaped by the will to move beyond one's beginnings. So when we begin to explore the rise of these unlikely royals, we are not just studying rare events. We are studying the deeper truth that power is never as controlled as the elite claim. It shifts. It opens. It responds to changing times. And in these openings, remarkable individuals step forward. Their names may appear in footnotes or in grand legends. Either way, They show that greatness can emerge from the most unexpected places. Their stories invite us to look past the polished surface of royal history. They invite us to see the real human beings who shaped empires. They invite us to consider how many more stories like theirs remain hidden in archives or lost to time. As we uncover the ones we can, we gain a better sense of the past. We learn that leadership has many faces. Some wear crowns from birth. Others earn them through force of will. The journeys ahead reveal all of this. They show how a stage performer became one of the most influential voices in Byzantium. They show how a common-born woman in China moved from servant to consort and left her mark on palace life. They show how women across Europe and Africa climbed beyond the limits set for them and secured places of authority. These stories are not simple tales of luck. They are accounts of human strength shaped by hardship and sharpened by experience. In exploring their paths, we gain a wider view of history. We see that society often forgets the people who rise from the lowest places. Yet these people often carry the most remarkable tales. Their climbs to power reveal the cracks in rigid systems. They show how ordinary lives can intersect with major events. They remind us that history is a living record of humans reaching beyond what they are told they can achieve. Their lives challenge the belief that birth determines destiny. They show that leadership is about more than lineage. It is about character, perception, and the ability to act at the right moment. These women did not wait for the world to grant them permission. They stepped into the arena and made their mark. Their stories continue to captivate us because they feel both distant and familiar. They belong to ancient courts, yet they echo truths that still matter today. Their journeys encourage us to look with fresh eyes at the past. They encourage us to recognize the individuals who shaped history from unexpected positions. They offer a reminder that greatness can rise from anywhere, even from places that seem far removed from power. Through their stories, we can see a fuller picture of what it means to lead and what it takes to rise. These are the women who rewrote the meaning of royalty. They came from the streets, the villages, the stages, and the servant quarters. They walked into courts that did not welcome them. They endured judgment, danger, and whispers. Yet they rose to heights that seemed impossible. Their stories give us a lens through which we can understand the past with greater depth. They encourage us to consider how history might have unfolded without their courage. As we follow their paths, we step into worlds shaped by rigid values but interrupted by the power of unexpected people. We move from the palaces of Byzantium to the courts of China and beyond. Each story reveals another layer of human possibility. Each life invites us to reflect on ambition, resilience, and the way history is shaped by those who refuse to remain in the place where they were born. The lives of the women who rose to unexpected power make sense only when we first sink into the world they began in. Their victories feel extraordinary because the ground beneath them was rough, unforgiving, and locked in old ideas. To understand how far they climbed, we must descend into the conditions they faced from their earliest days. Their stories do not start with silk or ceremony. They start in dark kitchens, muddy fields, cramped alleys, and in societies that believed the poor existed only to serve. The world of the lowborn was shaped by rules that seemed stronger than iron. These rules followed a person from cradle to grave and told them that their place was fixed forever. In many regions, poverty was not seen as a problem to solve. It was seen as a natural order. A child born into a family of farm workers was expected to follow that path. A girl born in a crowded city quarter learned early that her choices were few. She might wash clothes, scrub floors, haul water, or care for children who belonged to wealthier families. These jobs drained her time and strength and offered no escape. The idea of improving one's life through learning or trade was not even a dream for most. Education belonged to the privileged. Reading and writing were guarded skills, taught only to boys of respected families or to those who trained for religious work. For everyone else, the written word was like a locked door they were never meant to open. Food was scarce, and hunger shaped daily life in ways that people today might struggle to imagine. In some communities, whole seasons depended on a single harvest. When crops failed, the poor suffered first and most. They watched the grain stores of the wealthy remain protected while they stretched thin whatever their families had managed to gather. Illness spread quickly among them, because their homes were damp and crowded and their bodies were weakened by long days of labor. A cough could turn deadly. A wound could rot. Many died young, and those who survived carried scars that marked the hard conditions they endured. Girls faced even tighter chains. Their worth was tied to the labor they could provide or the marriage agreements their families could arrange. In many places, they had no voice in these decisions. They were expected to obey their fathers, then their husbands, and later their sons. Their days were full of tasks that demanded strength and patience but brought no recognition. Their futures were not seen as their own. They were raised to believe that ambition was dangerous, pride was shameful, and hope was something they should not hold. And even if a girl dared to imagine a different life, society was ready to crush the idea. The world reminded her at every turn that she was meant for service, not for power. Scullery maids knew this truth better than most. Their work demanded endless hours of scrubbing soot and grease from heavy pots, cleaning refuse others left behind, and sleeping in corners close to the kitchen so they could wake before dawn. The smell of smoke, rot, and sweat clung to them no matter how often they washed. Their hands cracked from hot water and harsh cleaning agents. They took orders from cooks who answered to stewards, who answered to nobles, who barely noticed the many hands that kept their tables full. A scullery maid could rarely rise to a higher position, even if she worked with perfect discipline. Her birth marked her as invisible, and no amount of labor could change that. For peasants in rural regions, the fields defined the rhythm of life from the moment they could walk. They learned to carry water, tend animals, and harvest crops. Their backs bent early from the weight of tools and baskets. Their clothes wore thin in cold seasons, and many faced months with barely enough to eat. Peasant families lived close to the earth, but they did not own it. Land was held by lords or officials who taxed them heavily, sometimes taking so much that families had nothing left to store for times of hardship. The cycle of work, payment, and survival kept them tied to the soil. The idea of a peasant walking into a royal court as a figure of power would have seemed unbelievable to anyone around them. City poor lived with a different kind of struggle. They shared narrow streets where waste piled and illness spread. Homes were built so close that sunlight barely touched the ground. Crowds moved through markets where people shouted for attention, selling whatever small goods they could produce or gather. Many lived as servants, apprentices, or performers. A performer, especially a woman, carried a heavy social burden. Her trade placed her on the lowest rungs of society. She entertained because she had no other path, and society judged her for the very work it demanded. Even when crowds cheered, their applause did not erase the stigma. Performers often lived with the constant fear of instability. One injury, one lost patron, one change in the political winds could push them back into deeper poverty. These women grew up in worlds where the powerful controlled every resource. A noble family had access to tutors, connections, political alliances, and wealth that reinforced their status. Nobles passed down their privileges through generations and considered themselves guardians of a divine or natural order. They believed leadership came only from their ranks. Someone born outside those circles was expected to accept a life of service and hardship without question. When a low-born woman showed intelligence or ambition, the response was often suspicion or punishment. Her talents were seen as threats rather than gifts. In some societies, even the law reinforced these barriers. Certain garments, tools, or forms of travel were reserved for the elites. People of humble birth were forbidden to carry weapons, ride certain horses, or enter specific halls. These rules kept them physically and socially distant from the spaces where power moved. They were not supposed to witness how decisions were made. They were meant to obey the outcomes without any say in the process. Because of these limits, early life for a girl at the bottom of society was defined by containment. Her world was small, shaped by the walls of her home, her workplace, and the boundaries that society carved around her gender and class. From birth, she learned to walk carefully, speak modestly, and avoid drawing attention. She grew skilled at tasks that kept wealthier households running or supported farms and villages. None of these skills seemed connected to royalty or governance. Nothing in her surroundings suggested she could become more than what she already was. Her role, as defined by society, was to survive quietly. And survival itself was not guaranteed. Winter storms, disease outbreaks, failed harvests, violent conflicts, and political shifts could wipe out families in an instant. The poor had no safety nets. When disaster struck, they carried the heaviest burden. The physical environment deepened their struggles. In many lands, poor families lived in homes built from cheap materials. Some slept on dirt floors. Others shared small straw beds. Fires provided warmth, but they also brought danger. A single spark could wipe out an entire neighborhood, leaving people with nothing but the clothes they wore. Bathing was rare because water had to be hauled or purchased, and time was too precious to spend on comfort. Work demanded more hours than daylight allowed, so people often labored by dim candlelight or moonlight. Their bodies paid the price. Sore joints, worn hands, slow healing wounds, and lingering fatigue. Yet even in these harsh worlds, low-born women developed strengths that would later help them rise when rare chances appeared. They learned how to read people, because their survival depended on it. They recognized danger in subtle gestures and found ways to navigate conflict in tight quarters. They developed a sense of timing, knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. They observed the moods of employers, guards, merchants, and officials. They saw the real workings of human nature long before they stepped into any court or palace. These skills came from necessity, not privilege. No tutor taught them. Life did. Still, the gap between their daily reality and the world of royalty was so wide that crossing it seemed impossible. Palaces were built as symbols of separation. Their gates were guarded, their halls filled with people trained in protocol and ceremony. A poor woman could pass by such walls her entire life without once imagining herself inside. The idea of sitting beside rulers, advising them, or shaping laws was beyond anything she could picture. This is why the eventual rise of these women feels so extraordinary. They did not come from families that groomed them for influence. They did not inherit advisors, tutors, or wealth. They did not receive invitations to banquets or ceremonies. Instead, they lived in places where food, shelter, and safety were daily concerns. Their earliest lessons came from the grind of labor and the harsh supervision of those above them. The structure of society kept the poor in place through fear as much as through law. They feared hunger, punishment, and the scorn of those who saw themselves as superior. They feared stepping outside the narrow path set for them. Punishments for defiance could be severe. A servant who angered an employer could lose her position. A peasant who spoke against a lord could be beaten or imprisoned. A performer who displeased the wrong audience could be banned or worse. Every step they took was shaped by these dangers. Even so, life at the bottom was filled with quiet forms of resilience. Women formed friendships with others who shared their hardships. They supported each other during illness, births, and losses. They passed down advice on surviving harsh seasons and avoiding the wrath of employers. They created small pockets of relief in a world that offered very little rest. These bonds gave them emotional strength, even when society denied them material comfort. Their experiences built a kind of wisdom that could not be learned in noble households. They understood the needs of ordinary people because they lived among them. They knew how policies affected families like theirs because they felt the consequences firsthand. When some of these women eventually reached positions of power, they brought with them insights that nobles lacked. But at the beginning of their lives, no one could have predicted such a future. The path out of poverty was blocked from nearly all directions. The wealthy guarded their positions closely. Institutions favored those already in power. Social customs treated ambition from the poor as foolish or dangerous. The world these women were born into told them that their fate had been sealed before they could speak their first word. When we look back, it becomes clear why their rise feels almost unreal. It was not simply a climb. It was a defiance of everything their society believed. It was a challenge to the very idea of fixed destiny. To understand the scale of their triumph, we must sit for a moment in the places where they began. We must picture the dark kitchens, the crowded city alleys, the cold fields, and the quiet corners where young girls worked with heads bowed, never imagining that history would one day speak their names. Their rise feels miraculous because their starting point was a world built to hold them down. The chains that bound them were not made of metal. They were made of ideas, customs, and fears passed down for generations. These chains shaped how people saw them and how they saw themselves. Breaking them required more than chance. It required courage, intelligence, and a rare spark of opportunity. When these women stepped beyond the lines drawn around them, they did not just change their own lives. They changed the meaning of power itself. Their journeys forced society to confront the idea that greatness can come from places it never expects. Their stories matter because they remind us that even the most rigid systems have cracks, and the people who rise through those cracks can reshape the world. Their origins show us the weight of the obstacles they overcame. They began in the lowest rooms of their societies. They lived with hunger, illiteracy, danger, and labor that left their bodies tired before adulthood. They heard constant reminders that they were nothing more than their birth. And yet they rose. When we carry forward into the triumphs that follow, this stark beginning gives their achievements deeper meaning. It shows that their rise was not simply rare. It was revolutionary. Now that we have stood with them in the shadows where their lives began, we can move forward into the next part of their story. We can watch how small moments shifted their paths and how extraordinary strength carried them through the gates of courts and empires that once seemed unreachable. Their climb makes sense only in the light of the hardships behind them, and it is this contrast that reveals the true scale of their legacy. The world we are about to enter opens naturally from the hard realities described before. It moves from the dim kitchens and crowded alleys into the restless heart of a city where the poor and the powerful brushed shoulders yet lived in different worlds. It begins in Constantinople, a city full of noise, smoke, color, and contradiction. It was a place where chariots thundered around the hippodrome, where crowds cheered or rioted, where merchants traded goods from distant lands, and where the mighty walls protected an empire that saw itself as the center of the world. Within this vibrant setting, a young girl grew up in conditions that marked her as someone who should never rise beyond the lowest ranks. Her name was Theodora, and the life she began in gave no hint of the heights she would one day reach. Her early years were tangled with the world of performers, laborers, handlers of animals, and workers who lived in the shadow of the hippodrome. They were not sheltered from the roughness around them. They knew the sting of hunger, the weight of judgment, and the harsh stares of those who believed anyone tied to the stage lived in disgrace. Performers lived close to poverty and were considered near the bottom of the social order. They entertained crowds but received no respect from the people they amused. Their pay was inconsistent, their safety uncertain, and their reputations vulnerable to scandal. This environment shaped Theodora's childhood. It taught her how fast fortunes could turn, how dangerous the crowd could be, and how sharp a person must become to survive among those who saw weakness as an opportunity. She carried the lessons of that world with her as she grew. She watched the way people behaved in public and in private. She learned how to read the shifting moods of crowds, how to speak in ways that drew attention, and how to turn her limited resources into chances. These abilities were not luxuries. They were necessary tools for a girl who had no protection. Her father had worked with animals in the hippodrome before his death, and after he was gone, her family's position became even more fragile. They struggled to keep their place in the performance world. Theodora and her sisters followed the path expected of them, entering the stage as performers while still young. To many in Constantinople, stage performance was linked with scandal. Those who lived in proximity to the hippodrome carried a social stain that could never be washed off. But beneath that harsh reputation, the world of performers also offered something rare. It offered exposure to all kinds of people. It allowed quick minds to observe the habits of nobles, officials, merchants, soldiers, and crowds. It trained confidence, presence, and the art of persuasion. These skills became the seeds of Theodora's future, though neither she nor anyone around her could have predicted it at the time. Her journey took her far from Constantinople for a period. She traveled with a man whose attention she had caught, but the relationship brought more hardship than stability. When the partnership ended, she found herself abandoned in a foreign region, tested again by poverty and instability. These years were difficult, yet they deepened her resourcefulness. She supported herself by spinning wool, a humble and exhausting task. She learned to survive without relying on lovers, patrons, or stage roles. She discovered a fierce independence that would later become one of her greatest strengths. Eventually, she returned to Constantinople. She had changed. She arrived not as a girl shaped by the crowds but as a woman who had endured humiliations and survived them. She was sharper, more aware, and more determined. She had seen different lands, different customs, and different courts. She understood that the world was larger than the narrow path set before her in childhood. This new perspective became a turning point. Her encounter with Justinian marked the beginning of the most defining chapter of her life. Justinian, at the time, was rising within the state and was close to becoming one of the most influential figures in the empire. He was ambitious and brilliant, but he also had a keen eye for people. He recognized qualities in Theodora that others overlooked. He saw intelligence, strength, and insight where society only saw her past. Their partnership did not form out of blind romance. It emerged from a meeting of minds. Theodora brought clarity, instinct, and a deep understanding of the common people. Justinian recognized that she possessed a rare combination of resilience and intuition that could support his own ambitions. Their relationship faced fierce opposition. Laws in Constantinople restricted marriages between men of high status and women with backgrounds like hers. Many believed Justinian was making a humiliating mistake. But Justinian refused to yield. He pushed for legal changes that allowed him to marry her, and eventually he succeeded. Their union did not erase her past in the eyes of the elite, but it placed her in a position no one of her background had ever reached. When Justinian ascended the throne, Theodora rose with him. Her coronation as Empress stunned the empire. To many it seemed unnatural. To others it seemed dangerous. But to those who had watched her grow from the edges of society, her rise may have felt like the impossible becoming real. She entered the palace with a presence that commanded attention. Her earlier life, filled with hardship and instability, had sharpened her ability to navigate conflict. She understood that every word spoken in the palace carried weight. She listened, observed, and acted with precision. One of the most striking moments of her rule came during the famous uprising that threatened to tear the empire apart. Crowds filled the streets, violence spread, and many urged Justinian to flee. It was Theodora who stopped the panic. She spoke calmly, clearly, and with an authority that grounded the court. She chose to stay, stating that flight would destroy everything they had built. Her words steadied Justinian and shifted the course of events. Her resolve became the anchor that saved the empire from collapse. This moment defined her in the eyes of many. It showed that she was not simply an empress by title. She was a leader in spirit. Beyond political crises, Theodora pushed for legal reforms that reflected her understanding of the vulnerable. Her own experiences shaped her empathy toward women who faced exploitation, abandonment, or violence. Laws during her reign introduced protections for women in situations that had long been ignored. They addressed issues of forced labor, abuse, and the exploitation that had shaped her own early life. These reforms were not symbolic gestures. They changed the daily realities for thousands who lived in the margins of society. She understood the struggles of these women in a way that nobles never could. She carried memories of fear, humiliation, and survival into the palace, and she used her power to ensure others would not endure the same suffering. Her influence extended into religious debates as well. The Byzantine Empire was often divided by theological disputes, and Theodora took part in these discussions with firm conviction. She supported groups that faced suppression and worked to maintain balance in a court where religious differences fueled tension. Her involvement in these debates revealed her commitment to stability, unity, and fairness. She was not content to sit quietly while others shaped the religious future of the empire. She argued, negotiated, and challenged scholars and clerics, showing that her intellect was as sharp as her political instincts. Theodora also played a role in shaping the image of the empire itself. She supported building projects and artistic commissions that reflected the strength of the state. She understood the power of appearance. She knew that majesty could influence diplomacy and unity. Her presence, captured in mosaics that still survive, reflects the image of a ruler who refused to be diminished by her origins. Her clothing, posture, and expression communicated dignity, resolve, and authority. These mosaics show not just an empress, but a woman who transformed the expectations of her age. Her legacy was not simple. After her death, some writers attempted to tarnish her memory by focusing on her early life. They found it easier to judge her childhood than to accept her accomplishments. They wrote with bias, leaning on old prejudices about performers and poor women. Yet others recognized her true impact. They described her courage, her intelligence, and her role in shaping laws and policies that endured long after her time. Modern scholars, examining the full scope of her life, understand that she was one of the most influential figures of her century. What makes her story so powerful is not just her rise to the throne. It is the way she carried the experiences of the poor into the highest office and used her power to change the lives of ordinary people. She broke the barrier between the world of the low-born and the world of emperors. She demonstrated that leadership grows from strength, clarity, and resilience, not from birth alone. Her life reveals the hidden possibilities within a rigid society. It challenges the belief that destiny is fixed. Her journey also connects with the broader theme of unlikely royals who rose from conditions meant to contain them. Theodora did not escape the hardships described earlier. She lived them. She endured humiliation, instability, and the limits imposed by class. She learned to survive without comfort or certainty. These experiences built the foundation that allowed her to stand firm when crises came. They taught her how to read danger, how to understand the fears of her subjects, and how to make decisions that nobles might hesitate to take. Her place in history remains secure because she reshaped the idea of what an empress could be. She proved that someone born at the bottom of society could rise not only to power but to influence that reached across laws, religion, and politics. Her story continues to inspire because it shows the strength of a person who refuses to remain where society places her. It shows how a single life, shaped by hardship, can alter the direction of an empire. When we follow her path from the rough world of the hippodrome to the glittering halls of the palace, we see a clear connection to the struggles of ordinary women in her time. Her rise carries meaning only when seen against the backdrop of poverty, judgment, and constraint that defined the lives of most girls of her birth. Her journey takes the darkness of those early years and sets it against the light of her later achievements, creating a contrast that reveals the full scale of her transformation. Her influence expands further when we consider the women who would follow, both in her own empire and beyond. Her example proved that the structures of society were not as solid as they seemed. It showed that talent and determination could break through even the highest walls. Theodora's life stands as a reminder that history is filled with moments when unexpected individuals rise and change the world. Her name continues to echo because she embodied the theme that draws all these stories together. The rise of those who were never meant to rise, the triumph of those born far from power, and the lasting imprint of those who transformed hardship into strength. Her story carries us naturally forward into the next histories that shaped empires across the world, where other women would face their own battles against impossible odds and leave marks just as deep. The path carved by Theodora shows how a woman born far from privilege could climb into the highest reaches of power. But her story is only one chapter in a much larger pattern. Across continents and centuries, other women faced different forms of confinement and expectation, yet they too found ways to step into positions that should have been beyond their reach. Their lives unfold in worlds shaped by different languages, customs, and political structures, but the threads that connect them are unmistakable. Each began in circumstances that denied them opportunity. Each faced pressures that should have pushed them toward a silent and predictable life. Each refused to remain where society placed her. The next two lives reveal how this pattern extended from the heart of Byzantium to ancient China, and then to the opulent but dangerous court of early modern France. These women did not rise through the same methods, and they did not face the same obstacles, but the essence of their stories reflects a shared truth. They rose because they recognized rare openings, used their intelligence to navigate systems designed to exclude them, and cultivated relationships that allowed them to move beyond the limitations of their birth. Their stories confirm that what we often call Cinderella tales are not bound to any one culture. They appear wherever society draws sharp lines between the privileged and the poor. Empress Su Pingjun lived in a world very different from Theodora's Constantinople. She did not grow up near a noisy public arena or among performers who lived from day to day. She lived in the Han Dynasty, an era that viewed social order as a reflection of cosmic harmony. Every person had a place. Every family had duties. Those above governed. Those below obeyed. The division seemed unbreakable. Yet even in this structured world, a woman of humble birth could find herself drawn into the highest sphere, not because her society welcomed such ambition but because the political landscape shifted in ways that opened a narrow path. Su Pingjun was born into a family without high status. Her early life would have been shaped by common routines, household tasks, careful obedience, and the expectation that her future would be decided by elders who arranged marriages based on what they could afford. There was no reason for her or anyone around her to imagine a life beyond these simple rhythms. Yet the currents of the dynasty moved around her in ways she could not see. Powerful families competed for influence. Court factions shifted. Alliances formed and collapsed. Young nobles sought brides not only for companionship but for strategic benefit. It was within this complex movement that chance intervened. The man who would one day become emperor met Su Pingjun not through the grand ceremonies that usually introduced noble families but through quieter, more personal circumstances. Her presence, character, and natural steadiness made an impression on him. She did not come with the heavy expectations that accompanied brides from rival noble houses. She carried no political baggage, represented no threat, and brought a sense of sincerity that set her apart. These qualities, which may have seemed ordinary in her daily life, became extraordinary in the eyes of a young noble whose world was full of calculation and suspicion. Their bond grew, and she became his chosen partner despite the protests of powerful families who wanted him to marry someone who could advance their own interests. But he insisted. When he eventually took the throne, she became empress. Her rise stunned the court because it broke unspoken rules. An empress was expected to come from noble lines that had long histories of service and wealth. Su Pingjun had neither. Yet she entered the palace with a calm dignity that made her presence feel natural despite the shock it caused. Life in the palace was not peaceful. The throne of the Han Dynasty was surrounded by political traps and dangerous plots. Factions that opposed her marriage continued to undermine her. They saw her as a low-born woman who did not deserve to share the emperor's authority. They feared her influence because it came from personal trust rather than strategic placement. Su Pingjun had to walk carefully among these threats, understanding that any misstep could bring danger to her, her husband, or her children. Her time as empress, though respected by the emperor, was marked by tension. She had no family power behind her. She could rely only on her judgment and the support of the man who had chosen her. She represented a challenge to those who believed the court should remain a closed world for the old families. Still, she maintained the modesty and sharp awareness that had shaped her early life. Her influence was subtle but important. She supported her husband's efforts to strengthen the dynasty and offered advice rooted not in privilege but in practical understanding. Her life ended too soon, the result of palace intrigue carried out by those who despised her rise. Yet her legacy endured because her story proved that even in a society built on strict hierarchy, a woman from ordinary beginnings could become the central figure in the empire's most powerful household. Her rise was not loud or dramatic. It was steady. It grew from the kind of quiet resilience formed in the hardships of common life. It showed that influence could come from sincerity, loyalty, and patience as much as from political force. Her life also demonstrated the fragility of such rises, reminding us that every step taken by a low-born woman in the palace carried risk. Even so, her story remains one of the earliest examples of a woman who crossed the boundaries of class and stepped into a place no one expected. From ancient China, the narrative moves forward many centuries and thousands of miles to a world that shone with a different kind of beauty. Pre-revolutionary France dazzled with palaces, salons, embroidered gowns, and polished manners. Yet beneath the surface of refinement lay sharp divisions and an atmosphere ripe with ambition. At Versailles, everything from a smile to a bow could shape a life. Those who mastered the language of courtly behavior could rise with astonishing speed, while those who failed to navigate its hidden rules could fall just as quickly. It was within this glittering but treacherous world that Jean Becu emerged. Born outside the structures of nobility, she entered life with no connections and no assurance of comfort or stability. Her mother worked in a household where she performed the kind of labor that kept wealthy families supplied with the conveniences they took for granted. Jean learned early that her future would not be shaped by inheritance but by her ability to read social cues, build relationships, and find ways to support herself. She developed charm, wit, and an ease in conversation that made her stand out. These qualities were not taught to her. They were learned through observation and through the need to survive in spaces where she was often judged before she spoke a word. As she grew, she entered circles where beauty and personality could offer opportunities that were otherwise closed to women of her birth. She moved through boutiques, salons, and social gatherings where patrons and protectors shaped the lives of those around them. Her rise began when she caught the attention of men with connections to the court. These relationships were controversial, but they also opened doors that she could not have accessed alone. Her intelligence allowed her to adapt quickly to the refined expectations of high society. She learned its etiquette, its subtle signals, and the way influence moved behind polite smiles. Her ability to engage others in conversation, make them laugh, and put them at ease became her most valuable strength. In time, she was introduced to King Louis XV. He was already older, burdened by the expectations of his position, and increasingly withdrawn from the politics of his realm. Jean brought life, warmth, and a sense of pleasure back into his world. He was captivated not just by her beauty but by her spirit. What followed was a rise that shocked the court. Jean Becu became Madame du Barry, the official mistress of the king. This position carried enormous influence, often more than many ministers held. It placed her in the center of Versailles, where every gesture was watched and every word could become gossip. Her presence enraged members of the aristocracy. They saw her birth as an insult to the dignity of the court. They believed no woman without noble lineage should share the king's attention or enjoy the privileges that came with her new title. But Madame du Barry did not withdraw. She carried herself with confidence, using her charm to navigate the complicated social networks around her. She built alliances with those who recognized her influence and provided support to artists, charities, and political figures who sought her favor. Her rise revealed the cracks in the aristocratic worldview. Her intelligence allowed her to hold her place even when others tried to undermine her. She understood that her power rested on her ability to maintain the king's trust and remain composed under scrutiny. Life at Versailles was not glamorous for her in the way it appeared from afar. It required constant awareness, strategic thinking, and emotional control. Every step mattered. Every conversation had consequences. The end of her time at court came with the death of the king. Without him, she lost the protection that allowed her to maintain her position. The changes that followed in France swept away the world that had lifted her. Yet her rise remains one of the most striking examples of a woman who transformed the conditions of her birth into a gateway to influence. Both Su Pingjun and Madame du Barry faced different kinds of obstacles, shaped by cultures that do not resemble each other on the surface. One lived in an ancient dynasty that valued order, modesty, and tradition. The other lived in a world of excess, spectacle, and political games cloaked in polite language. Yet the deeper patterns of their lives mirror each other in ways that reveal the universal nature of unlikely ascension. Each woman began far from the palaces she eventually entered. Each learned early how to read her surroundings, how to adapt, and how to protect herself. Each used the qualities society overlooked to carve a path into spaces that were not built for her. They did not inherit tutors, wealth, or family alliances. They relied on instincts shaped by hardship. They saw opportunities where others saw barriers. They recognized that influence often flows through personal relationships, emotional intelligence, and the ability to understand people's desires and fears. Their stories also reveal how societies respond to women who challenge the expectations of birth. Both faced hostility from the established elite. Both were judged not by their actions but by the circumstances of their origins. Those who opposed them saw their rise as a threat to order, a reminder that the hierarchy they defended was more fragile than they admitted. This resistance shows how deeply societies fear the idea that greatness might come from unexpected places. Yet despite the criticism, both women shaped their worlds in lasting ways. Su Pingjuan's rise influenced the direction of the dynasty and set examples of restraint and dignity that contrasted with the most extreme behaviors of court politics. Madame du Barry influenced culture, taste, and the daily life of the court, while also revealing how unstable the lives of those connected to power could be. Like Theodora, they proved that talents formed in harsh environments could become valuable resources within the halls of authority. Their lives confirm that the idea of a woman rising from obscurity to power is not a myth limited to one culture. It appears in the East and the West, in ancient and early modern worlds, in societies built on strict order and in those built on splendor. What links these stories is not the setting but the human qualities that drive them. Resilience, insight, the ability to recognize opportunity, and the courage to step beyond the limits imposed by birth. Each life also deepens the theme that echoes through every part of this exploration. History is not shaped only by those born into luxury and expectation. It is shaped by those who rise despite the world's efforts to hold them down. The journeys of Su Pingjun and Madame du Barry add new layers to this truth. They show how different societies, even though separated by oceans and millennia, produced women who found ways to challenge tradition and enter the highest levels of influence. Their paths were not simple, and their legacies are complex. But their stories remind us that power often emerges from places ignored by the elite. They show us that the human spirit, shaped by adversity, can rise in ways that challenge every assumption about destiny. They draw a clear line to Theodora, and they prepare us to explore further examples of women who transformed their stations, stepped into danger, and left marks on history that defied the worlds they inherited. The lives of Theodora, Su Pingjun, and Madame du Barry form a chain that stretches across cultures and centuries. Yet each link reflects the same force that drives people to push against the boundaries of their birth. Their worlds differ in language, clothing, ritual, and expectation, but the core of their experience remains consistent. They grew up believing that the limits placed on them were permanent. They lived in societies that told them to accept their roles without question. They existed within structures that favored the privileged and punished anyone who dared to think beyond those confines. Yet each of them found a way to break through. Their stories do more than offer a sequence of surprising events. They challenge us to think about how power functions, who gets to hold it, and why some lives that begin in hardship end in greatness. They urge us to rethink how we understand ambition, not as a trait limited to the elite but as a universal drive that emerges wherever people confront impossible odds. They show us that the walls built around class, gender, and wealth are never as firm as they appear. Pressure from unexpected places can weaken them. Courage, determination, and insight can turn small cracks into openings that allow a person to step into a space once considered unreachable. Across these stories, one lesson becomes clear. The will to rise does not come from privilege. It comes from struggle. It grows in those who have seen the realities of hardship, who understand what it means to live in a world that ignores or dismisses them. Theodora's early life exposed her to judgment and isolation. Su Pingjun learned to move quietly in a system that left no room for error. Jean Becu discovered early that nothing would be given to her unless she fought for it. These women did not rise despite their origins. They rose because their origins shaped their ability to read people, adapt to change, and face danger without flinching. When we look at their lives, we can see how ambition operates in environments where most people accept their lot. Ambition in these contexts is not loud. It does not announce itself. It grows through observation, patience, and the willingness to seize rare opportunities. Theodora's rise depended on her ability to understand human nature and respond to shifting tides within the empire. Su Pingjuan's rise required her to hold steady under pressure and show qualities that made her indispensable to the future emperor. Madame du Barry's rise grew from her talent for navigating a world where everything depended on charm, conversation, and the subtle management of social networks. Their stories also show how gender roles shaped the paths available to them. In every era, women faced restrictions that limited their access to education, resources, and public authority. They were expected to remain silent in political matters, to obey male guardians, and to remain within domestic spaces. Yet these same expectations sometimes created unexpected openings. Powerful men often overlooked women, assuming they lacked influence. This gave women like Theodora, Su Pingjun, and Jean Becu room to maneuver. Their actions were not watched as closely as those of men, at least not until they rose high enough to be seen as threats. By then, they had already learned how to navigate danger. Still, their success did not change the fact that the structures around them were designed to keep people like them out. Their stories remind us that social mobility existed in the past, but it was narrow, unpredictable, and often dangerous. Rising too fast could provoke jealousy, resentment, or fear. Each of these women faced people who believed their ascent threatened the natural order. Some saw them as intruders, others as symbols of decay, and still others as dangerous reminders that privilege alone could not secure influence. The backlash they faced reveals a recurring truth in history. Those who rise from humble beginnings often face harsher judgment than those born to power. Their stories also reveal something deeper about the nature of power. Power is not only a matter of birth, titles, or wealth. It flows through relationships, knowledge, and the ability to influence others. Theodora shaped laws, guided imperial decisions, and stood firm during crises because she knew how to use her voice. Su Pingjun influenced the dynasty by offering counsel shaped by sincerity and a steady character. Madame du Barry shaped the court by setting trends, guiding alliances, and using her presence at Versailles to elevate those around her. Their influence came from understanding what people wanted, feared, and valued. In each case, their power also depended on the support of men who recognized their intelligence and trusted their insight. But their influence did not come only from these connections. It came from their own strength. Many women in similar positions never became influential because they lacked the qualities these three possessed. Their rise was not an accident. It was the result of skill, intuition, courage, and determination. This insight carries weight even now. In our own time, we often see success as a result of talent or opportunity alone. These stories remind us that success also grows from persistence, awareness, and the willingness to stand firm in hostile environments. They remind us that ambition, when combined with preparation and resilience, can break through barriers that seem unbreakable. Another important lesson lies in the tension between individual will and social expectation. In every era, society teaches people to remain within certain boundaries. Some of these boundaries are rooted in tradition. Others are shaped by fears of disorder. But the human spirit does not always accept these limits. Even in eras when hierarchy seemed absolute, people found ways to rise. These women reveal how the desire to transcend one's station can reshape personal destiny, influence nations, and alter history. Their lives show that individual will is not fragile. It can survive poverty, rejection, judgment, and danger. It can adapt, learn, and grow stronger. It can move through spaces where others see only closed doors. This theme echoes from Constantinople to the Han Court to Versailles. It reminds us that history is not only the story of those born to rule. It is also the story of those who refused to accept the roles they were given. Their lives also invite us to question how we interpret history. Much of what we know comes from sources written by the powerful or those close to them. These records often overlook or downplay the contributions of women who rose from obscurity. They sometimes portray them as anomalies or curiosities, rather than as examples of a broader human pattern. By examining their stories closely, we uncover deeper truths about how societies function and how individuals navigate systems designed to restrict them. When we look at these women not as footnotes but as central figures, we gain a more complete view of the past. We see how systems of power can be challenged from below. We see how lives shaped by hardship can influence nations. We see how resilience can alter the course of empires. Their stories encourage us to ask what other lives remain hidden in the shadows of the past simply because they do not fit the common narrative. These stories also resonate because they speak to timeless human desires. The desire to rise. The desire to be heard. The desire to shape one's fate. These desires did not disappear after Theodora, Su Pingjun, or Madame du Barry. They continue to influence our world today. They appear in every society, whether modern or ancient, rich or poor, democratic or autocratic. The tools used to pursue these desires change over time, but the drive remains the same. In the modern world, the boundaries of class and gender have shifted but not disappeared. New forms of inequality have emerged. Old forms still linger. Yet the lessons from these stories remind us that change begins when individuals refuse to accept limits. It grows when people recognize their own potential. It spreads when courage meets opportunity. History shows that those who challenge the structures around them often face resistance, but they also open paths for others. Their stories remind us that social mobility is not only a matter of policy or economics. It is also a matter of human will. It depends on the choices people make, the risks they take, and the perseverance they show when obstacles appear. Their lives encourage us to look beyond the surface of our own world and ask where similar forces are at work today. Who is rising from unexpected places? Who is challenging old assumptions? Who is shaping the future in ways we have not yet recognized? These women also demonstrate that influence is not limited to those who hold official power. It can come from personal relationships, cultural impact, or a unique ability to inspire loyalty. It can move quietly or boldly. It can shift the mood of a court, guide an emperor's decisions, or strengthen the resolve of a nation. Influence is not a single thing. It evolves with every person who discovers how to use it. As we reflect on their stories, we can see how history often repeats the same patterns. People are born into hardship. They learn to survive. They find mentors or allies. They confront those who doubt them. They rise when circumstances shift. These patterns extend beyond gender, class, and geography. They speak to a universal truth about human life. The echoes of their ambition challenge us to look at our own assumptions. They push us to question who we think belongs in positions of power. They encourage us to reconsider the stories we tell about our world and the forces that shape it. They suggest that greatness can emerge from any corner, at any moment, when a person decides that the life they were handed is not enough. As we continue this exploration of history, we invite you to think about these themes, to reflect on the patterns that connect past and present, and to consider how these stories reshape our understanding of power. If these tales have sparked questions or reflections, share your thoughts below. And if you want to continue discovering the hidden paths, forgotten voices, and surprising figures who shaped our world, join us for future explorations as we uncover more stories that challenge the boundaries of history.